First, we're going to be looking at a Jacobin article shedding some light on the ICJ's ruling against Isreal. After that, we're going to look at Nancy Pelosi's statement regarding her doubts to the authenticity of pro-Palestine protests, and we're going to learn a little bit about Israel's history of paying American protesters and politicians. Finally, we are going to touch on the U.S. government halting funding to the United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, or UNRWA. Let's dive right into it. This article is titled, ICJ's Genocide Ruling is a Rebuke to Israel and the U.S. by Chip Gibbons. As Israeli bombs continued to fall on Gaza, Judge Joan Donahue, president of the International Court of Justice, read out the court's order earlier today that Israel must comply with the United Nations Genocide Convention. The ICJ found it plausible that Israel has contravened the international treaty, officially known as the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, and in a 16-2 ruling, ordered Israel to cease its violations, including killing and injuring Palestinians, and imposing on them conditions of life calculated to bring about their physical destruction as a people. In two 16-1 rulings, the ICJ also declared that Israel must prohibit the incitement of genocide by top Israeli leaders and allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. Notably, the court failed to call for a ceasefire. Nonetheless, speaking outside the court in The Hague, South African Foreign Minister Naledi Pandor praised the decision, quote, in exercising the order. She stated, quote, there will have to be a ceasefire. Without it, the order doesn't actually work, end quote. The binding orders were a serious rebuke, not only to Israel, but to its powerful backers in the U.S. government. The background of the case. In late December, South Africa initiated proceedings against Israel under the Genocide Convention. The treaty signatories agreed to the authority of the ICJ in interpreting it, and the ICJ has allowed any signatory of the treaty, not just those who are victims of genocide, to sue another signatory who breaches the convention. South Africa's case against Israel will take a long time to fully settle, but under the Genocide Convention, a party can request provisional measures pending the outcome of the case. Such measures are granted only in extraordinary circumstances. While they do not require the court to find a genocide has taken place, such a decision is for later in the proceedings. They do require that claims of genocide be plausible. They also require a finding by the court that without the measures, irreparable harm to rights under the convention will take place. During oral arguments earlier this month, South Africa laid out a powerful case that such steps were needed. Its lawyers detailed the massive loss of civilian lives and the deliberate destruction of civilian infrastructure. They described how Israel's relentless bombardment had rendered Palestinians homeless and caused children to have their limbs amputated without anesthetic. They recounted how Israel had told Palestinians to flee or be bombed, only to shell them en route to supposed safe zones and in the safe zones themselves. They explained how hospitals had been targeted, and food, water, and medicine had been denied. Among the civilian casualties, there were medics, UN workers, and journalists, at least some of whom appeared to have been intentionally attacked. South Africa argued that the nature of these chilling, conscious attacks on civilians implied genocidal intent, but they went further, citing the comments of high-ranking Israeli officials that showed clear-cut genocidal intent. Israel's legal team disputed nearly every aspect of the South Africa case. They insisted that the ICJ lacked jurisdiction to hear the case, as there was no dispute between South Africa and Israel. They challenged the accuracy of the death count, while implying that those killed could have been slain by Hamas, that they could have been combatants, or if they were civilians, that Israel was justified in killing them. But in a stunning censure of Israel, the overwhelming majority of the court, including in some cases an ad hoc judge handpicked by Israel, rejected these arguments. Today's ruling was a decisive victory for South Africa. Egregious abuses. In its proposed provisional measures, South Africa included a halt to all of Israel's military operations in Gaza, a ceasefire. Today's ruling doesn't deliver that. While the ICJ did not explicitly reject the call for ceasefire, it omitted its mention. The ICJ could and should have ordered Israel to fully halt its assault on Gaza, but it must be noted that when Bosnia and Herzegovina requested a similar provisional measure against Yugoslavia in the 1990s, the ICJ similarly did not grant it. While South Africa was correct in directly raising the issue, it was highly unlikely the ICJ was going to grant it. At the same time, as South African Foreign Minister Pandor and UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories Francesca Albanese pointed out, it is difficult to see how Israel could comply with an order to stop killing and injuring Palestinians in Gaza without a ceasefire. What is astonishing is how nearly unanimous the rulings were. Like many observers, I had anticipated at least a partial schism between those judges from the global north and those from the global south. The court's president, Donna Hugh, is a career State Department lawyer. In that role, she served as a U.S. legal advisor during the ICJ case Nicaragua versus U.S., during which the ICJ found the United States had flouted international law in its efforts to overthrow the Sandinistas. In each of the ordered measures, Donahue joined the majority. Typically, the ICJ consists of 15 jurists. When none of the judges are from a country party to the dispute, the country gets to appoint an ad hoc judge of their own nationality. Both South Africa and Israel named an ad hoc judge, bringing the number of jurists to 17. And 2 of the 6 orders, Israel's own judge joined with the majority, leaving Ugandan jurist Julia Sebutinde as the sole dissent. In short, Israel's abuses were so egregious that even a career State Department apparatchik and its own hand-picked judge ruled against it. A massive ruling. Francis Boyle, the international law professor who led Bosnia and Herzegovina's legal efforts against Yugoslavia at the ICJ, called today's ruling, quote, a massive, overwhelming legal victory for the Republic of South Africa against Israel on behalf of the Palestinians, end quote. He noted that it paved the way for the UN General Assembly to suspend Israel and for the prosecution of Israeli officials. South Africa is not the only one seeking to enforce the Genocide Convention. The U.S.-based human rights group Center for Constitutional Rights has filed a lawsuit in U.S. courts on behalf of 2 Palestinian NGOs against President Joe Biden, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin under the Genocide Convention. Oral arguments on whether to dismiss the case, Defense for Children International, Palestine versus Biden, are scheduled for today. The U.S. Congress has ratified the Genocide Convention, which means under the U.S. Constitution it is the quote-unquote supreme law of the land. The convention prohibits not just carrying out genocide, but being complicit in genocide. It's incredibly unlikely that a U.S. court would issue a direct rebuke to U.S. foreign policy on the basis of the Genocide Convention, but today's ruling provides a boost to the case against Biden and Blinken. Neither Israel's genocide nor the United States' support for its apartheid policies will be ended by the stroke of a judge's pen, and law is not a substitute for political struggle, but today today's victory at the ICJ is a victory for Palestinian rights writ large and has the potential to help build the movement to end Israel's assault on Gaza. Alright, that's going to do it for our reading of the Jacobin article regarding the ICJ's decision. Next, we're going to take a look at a statement made by Nancy Pelosi during this Sunday's State of the Union on CNN with Dana Bash regarding Nancy Pelosi's skepticism to the authenticity of some of these pro-Palestinian protests. She says, quote, "For them to call for a ceasefire is Mr. Putin's message. Make no mistake, this is directly connected to what he would like to see. Same thing with Ukraine. It's about Putin's message. I think some of these protesters are spontaneous and organic and sincere. Some, I think, are connected to Russia. And I say that having looked at this for a long time now. Isn't that just rich? Coming from someone who had made $600,000 from 1990 to 2023 from pro-Israel lobbyists. Personally made $600,000 off of these people. It's clearly an attempt to sow discord among pro-Palestinian protesters in a Red Scare fashion to split the opposition. To have each organization protesting thinking the others may be agents of Russia, while the outsiders just get to assume that all of them are. It's not going to work, I don't think, although liberals are buying it wholeheartedly. But creating an environment where the opposition is always done by Russia or China. Democrats think they can create an environment free of scrutiny and criticism. All you have to do is equate the opposition to your chosen national opponent. The exact same scapegoating that the Democrats accuse the Republicans of doing, and rightly accusing them of doing so, with China and other countries like Mexico, but they sure like to turn a blind eye with their preferred candidates. Meanwhile, organizations such as Isreal On Campus Coalition, the ICC, not to be confused with the International Criminal Court, has paid protesters $250 apiece in quote-unquote micro grants to attend pro-Israel protests. Now, given that Nancy Pelosi has taken over $600,000 from Israeli lobbyists, while also our administration's turning a blind eye to paid protests by Israel, I find it hard to believe her COINTELPRO level accusations. But only time will tell how effective this propaganda is. Next up, we're going to take a look at the accusations made by the United States against the United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, also known as UNRWA. First, we're going to take a look at the brief statement put out by the organization in response to its cutting of funding by 9 different countries. 9 countries have, as of today, temporarily suspended their funding to UNRWA. These decisions threaten our ongoing humanitarian work across the region, including and especially in the Gaza Strip. It is shocking to see a suspension of funding to the agency in reaction to allegations against a small group of staff, especially given the immediate action that UNRWA took by terminating their contracts and asking for a transparent, independent investigation. The United Nations Office of Internal Oversight Services, OIOS, the highest investigative authority in the UN system, has already been seized of this very serious matter. Quote, UNRWA is the primary humanitarian agency in Gaza, with over 2 million people depending on it for their sheer survival. Many are hungry as the clock is ticking towards a looming famine. The agency runs shelters for over 1 million people and provides food and primary health care, even at the height of the hostilities. In its ruling yesterday, the International Court of Justice ordered that, quote, Israel must take immediate and effective measures to enable the provision of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance to address the adverse conditions of life faced by Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. These measures are aimed at preventing irreparable damage to the rights of Palestinians. The only way that this can be done is through cooperation with international partners, especially UNRWA, as the largest humanitarian actor in Gaza. Some 3,000 Corps staff out of 13,000 in Gaza continue to report to work, giving their communities a lifeline which can collapse any time now due to lack of funding. It would be immensely irresponsible to sanction an agency and an entire community it serves because of allegations of criminal acts against some individuals, especially at a time of war, displacement, and political crisis in the region. UNRWA shares the list of all its staff with host countries every year, including Israel. The agency never received any concerns on specific staff members. Meanwhile, an investigation by OIOS into the heinous allegations will establish the facts. Moreover, as I announced on 17th of January, an independent review by external experts will help UNRWA strengthen its framework for the strict adherence of all staff to the humanitarian principles. I urge countries who have suspended their funding to reconsider their decision before UNRWA is forced to suspend its humanitarian response. The lives of people in Gaza depend on this support, and so does regional stability. It is very clear that the UNRWA is doing everything that it can to maintain healthy relationships with these countries in hopes of retaining its funding. And it has become very clear the way that these countries have weaponized this aid in response to the ICJ's ruling, with America as Israel's co-conspirator. I think it was described best by Chris Gunnis, former UNRWA spokesperson, recently to British Channel 4 News, and I quote, "This is a bit like suspending funding to the NHS because Lucy Letby killed some babies. It is wholly disproportionate and it is punitive. It will punish, like many financial sanctions do, the poorest and the most disadvantaged." For anyone who isn't familiar with Lucy Letby, she was a British neonatal nurse that in 2018 was arrested for murdering 7 infants and attempted murder of 6 others. And in seeing how the organization has been treated by multiple countries over the last few days, this anecdote seems pretty accurate. Hopefully funding for the organization will return to normal soon, and hopefully a ceasefire instituted even sooner. That's going to be it for this time. Thanks for joining us. Like and subscribe down below if you enjoyed this, and have a great rest of your day. Take care.